Hi. I'm Molly Ball. I'm a staff writer for The Atlantic, and I am here with a man who I think needs no introduction in Washington. Way back in 1987, Barney Frank was the first member of Congress to voluntarily come out, and he is now happily retired after 3 decades in the House. Is that presumptuous to say? Are you happily retired?
Oh, yes. No,
very happily retired.
No, it is not presumptuous. Yes, I am happy.
And he's written a wonderful new memoir called, of course, Frank, which I believe you can pick up here in the bookstore. Congressman, your life and your career is such a good sort of template for all the themes that we're talking about today. When I talk to people involved in this movement for gay rights, there's a sense that it's almost unbelievable how far we've come and how fast. Did you think we would get here where we are today?
No, my involvement began in 1972 when I was elected for the first time to office of Massachusetts State House of Representatives, and I filed the gay rights bill. And by the way, I became the sponsor. I just got elected. I was a closeted gay man. I was worried about being too prominent, but I made a vow, literally, to myself when I first ran, that while I did not think it would be possible to come, I knew it wouldn't be possible to come out then. I wasn't sure it ever would be if I wanted to have a political career, and I would have to choose. But I also decided that it would be contemptible to do anything less than be a full-fledged advocate, because I've maintained from the beginning that the right to privacy does not convey with you a right to hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to be the main sponsor, so I checked off a questionnaire that said I would be a sponsor, and by process of elimination, I was the only one, I became the lead sponsor. And so over the 43 years, up to the Supreme Court, well, just before that, but for over 40 years, if at any point in that period you would ask me what I expected the state of our movement to be in terms of success 3 years later, I would have been too pessimistic. Yes, it has been obviously too slow from the standpoint of what would be morally correct, but by the comparison to any other major social movement in America, it's been astronomically fast.
And why do you think that has happened?
Mainly because we stopped hiding, and then our reality beat the prejudice. I think we were the victim of one of the least substantial prejudices in history. And as I pointed out to people, if you dislike people because of some aspect of their personality, but for many years having known them, you couldn't tell that you were supposed to dislike them, that does not speak to the substantiality of your objection. We had that, frankly, sort of that ability that we were able to infiltrate straight society. A very large number of people back when, it's not the case as much anymore, but we had many of us sort of established ourselves as reasonable, decent, healthy people, friends, relatives, customers, brothers, sisters, etc. And then when we came out, it was, well, okay, that eroded the prejudice. And then we had the second advantage of our opponents. There's a great quote from La Rochefoucauld. Hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. I'm not talking now about the hypocritical gay, anti-gay elected officials, but what happened was there were people who didn't like us. They were just bigoted and prejudiced against us. At first, when we were dealing with this in the 70s, people were unconstrained and saying, I'm not going to hire some dyke, I don't like them. But as things evolved, it became inappropriate to say that they didn't want us to have equal treatment because they didn't like us. So they had to invent reasons why it would be a problem. And the problem they had was, as they invented reasons, as things progressed, their reasons kept being totally refuted. And the best example of that, of course, is marriage. We had a terrible problem with marriage. We were in a vicious cycle. There were these fears that if you had same-sex marriage, it would destabilize society, undercut traditional marriage. Never explained, but it was new and it was scary to people. And we could not establish marriage politically enough support as long as the fear was there. But we couldn't get rid of the fear until we had it. And then, so the great hero of all this is Chief Justice Margaret Marshall of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Unlike some of my friends from California who think the world was invented several years later, in fact, when Massachusetts got marriage, beginning in 2004, that's when I became confident that we were going to win. It was almost in military terms, you establish a beachhead and you work out from there. Once we had marriage in Massachusetts, we knew that all of the negative consequences that people had described would be disproven. And as that happened, we would go forward. I just, an aside on a separate issue, but that model of people not wanting you to do something, but not really wanting to just say they don't like it, and therefore inventing reasons why it would be socially destabilizing, and then as some reality happens, that going away, I believe that model, which led to the legalization of same-sex marriage, is going to be the model by which we legalize marijuana in America.
That's very interesting. I want to go back, though, to Massachusetts, because I think a lot of the pain and the difficulty that accompanied these changes gets glossed over when it all looks so inevitable in retrospect. But there were protests in the streets. You had the entire Catholic Church. You had Mitt Romney. You know, this was a huge. Where were you when that happened, and what was that experience for you?
I was a member of Congress, and I worked very closely. There's a very good book, if you want it. It's a great book about how LGBT people should lobby. It's a great book about how the legislative process works. It's a great book about politics. It's called Winning Marriage by a man named Mark Solomon.
Yeah.
And it is an excellent book. I'm going to be teaching at Stanford a one-week course in legislation, and I'm going to use that book. And no, there was no inevitability. And in fact, but here's, I think it's part of what I take from this. On the day that the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court issued its opinion, 4-3 in favor of marriage, if there'd been a referendum in Massachusetts, it would have lost overwhelmingly. They would have repudiated it. If there'd been a vote in the legislature, it would have been lucky to get 1/3 of the vote in support. As Mark Solomon said, when the decision came down, there were some people who said, well, they didn't want it overturned, but they had. I didn't realize, he said that I was the only elected official who said, oh, that's the right thing, that's a good thing, it's going to make people happier. I was a member of Congress, but I worked with them in lobbying, and here was the deal. Under the Massachusetts Constitution, if the legislature voted by a majority, they could have put a referendum on the ballot to repeal it. Failing that, if they got 25% of the joint legislature, the House and Senate together, they could put it on the ballot, and by that time I thought we'd win, but nobody wanted to go through that. So what then happened was, and it had to be two separate legislatures, so they got it the first time, but we didn't expect not to. After the election of 2004, where this was an issue, well, what happened was in 2004, Mitt Romney was then the governor of Massachusetts, and he saw this as his ticket to the Republican nomination to the presidency. He was the governor when this happened. It wasn't his fault, he could say, because it was the Supreme Court. None of his appointees voted for it, although it was a previous Republican governor, Bill Weld appointees who did, and Paul Cellucci. But he then went out, and there was a major campaign in Massachusetts in 2004 for the state legislature, with Mitt Romney trying to defeat people who had voted not to put it on the ballot. And we were campaigning for people to put it on the ballot. And the mobilization was successful on our side. And as a result, they were able in 2005 to keep the votes in the legislature from putting it on the ballot to below 25%. By that point, we knew once we had it, they were never going to go back and uproot it because it would have been clear that it had worked. So I was part of a very successful effort, and I hold it out as a model for the political mobilization of the LGBT community. And by the way, they didn't do it by marching. They didn't do it by demonstrating. There weren't any marry-ins. There may have been, but what they did was very thoughtful, successful lobbying of the legislators. They mobilized people. They went to see their legislators. They lobbied. Frankly, you would have thought we were the NRA in terms of the effectiveness, because they're the best lobbyists in America. And I really recommend to people, that is the model about how you do something.
Well, and they won elections. And as a political writer, right. I love Mark's book as well, because what he really shows is that this was a street fight, and this was an electoral campaign on a very micro level.
Exactly. I'm glad you pointed out, because it was a street fight, not a street rally. It wasn't us meeting together and congratulating ourselves on our righteousness. It was engaging.
Does that happen in Democratic politics?
It happens in LGBT politics all too often, but not in any movement politics. Mm-hmm. Look, I have a rule. If you care deeply about an issue and you are out there demonstrating your commitment in a way that makes you feel reinforced and happy and cheerful and among friends, you are probably not helping. Because we don't advance this by reassuring each other. You engage, not the enemy, but the people in the middle. You don't waste your time on people who are irrevocable. But yeah, they went to people in the middle. They brought, and it shows, yeah, politicians were trying to listen to their constituents, and they brought groups of people, their constituents. And I heard Gene Robinson, let me reinforce part of what Gene said. Part of it was by bringing married couples. It was partly political pressure on the legislators, but it was partly educating them. Hey, here we are. We're a married couple. Why are we a problem to you? And Gene is exactly right. We did that early with lesbian, gay, and to some extent bisexual people. The problem with the transgender issue was we started that later. I think they've caught up a lot. In terms of, so it was a joint, politically, well, there were three things. First of all, you went to people who were sympathetic and said, if you vote for us, we will be supportive. What I did in 2004, I didn't have a tough race myself for re-election. I did about a dozen fundraisers for members of the legislature or candidates for the legislature who were voting with us. I mean, one of the things that this mass equality group did was to say to them, if you vote with us and you're under pressure, we will come to your aid. We will be supportive.
And you'll have money.
Yes, we'll raise money. I got every member of the Massachusetts House delegation sent a joint letter to the legislature and called the members of the legislature in their district saying, don't vote for this. You don't need to do it. Nancy Pelosi called the president of the state senate, who was a woman, and so it was a joint effort that way. But the other thing was, we went to people who were in the middle and said, look, we think we have more votes. You'll get more votes by voting with us than not. We helped them raise money, and people saw real life, flesh and blood couples and their children, and there was a personal element.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested in theories of social change, and whether it's outside in or inside out. I mean, you're a politician, so obviously you believe that some part of it comes from that side of things, from the legislative process. But there is this also movement politics, like you said, the people coming out and becoming more visible in society. So is that a chicken and egg process? Does one come before the other?
There's a third one. The coming out was the prerequisite. Look, you can't persuade legislators that they will benefit from voting for gay and lesbian people if they don't know that there were gay and lesbian people in their districts. We were the invisible group there, so people say, I don't know anybody like that. I mean, there's a famous thing of the justice who was the key vote.
Kennedy.
No,
Powell.
Lewis Powell. He was the key vote against us in the first sodomy case, and he told one of his gay clerks that he didn't know any gay people. I mean, which he didn't know any gay people. He didn't know any people that he knew were gay, but
right.
That became, I don't know any gay people. Not even Scalia would claim that now. Actually, he thinks we're everywhere infiltrating him. But
well, you just said that's true.
Well, yes, it is. But we're not infiltrating. Well, that's what we had. Now that's a fair point. But the point is that it was being who we were. But I will tell you, I think very little of marches and demonstrations, except for this. If they activate people then to talk to their legislators. Look, I'm very critical of the big march in 1993. I write about this in my book. Hundreds of thousands of LGBT people came to Washington, and virtually none of them made any contact with their congressional representatives. And we were fighting don't ask, don't tell, and it did us more harm than good because of the nature of it. In fact, I contrast the 93 March on Washington by LGBT people with the 63 March on Washington by African Americans. The first was a dignified, disciplined, thoughtful effort to appeal to members of Congress. 93 was an undisciplined, let's just express our emotions. And it probably hurt us more than helped us. But as far as, ultimately, it's winning the votes. You have to be out there, and the rallies, the demonstrations, those are helpful if they mobilize people then to do something.
To engage in the process.
Look, there was a big march on Washington. It was in October 2009, just before, or 2010, it was in October. Congress had adjourned, and I thought it was a total waste of time. They brought a bunch of people here, and they said, we're going to put pressure on Congress. I said, all you did was put pressure on the grass. I mean,
Well, I want to ask you one more thing, and then we'll have time for probably one, maybe two questions. But there is now this normalization of gay life, right? Gay people getting married, being parts of communities, being just like everybody else. And something that I hear from a lot of people in the movement is that they miss the sort of solidarity that came from that marginalization, the sense of a distinct culture. Do you have any nostalgia for that?
First of all, if people want to associate with other gay and lesbian and bisexual and transgender people, they have every opportunity to do so. No, I have no sympathy with the idea of saying, oh, poor us, we're not oppressed anymore.
Fair enough. Fair
Look,
enough.
I'll make an analogy. I'm Jewish. Anti-Semitism was a serious issue in America 60 years ago. And when I was first thinking about politics, there was still a constraint about being Jewish. I think anti-Semitism as a social, economic, political factor has disappeared. There's still some bigots out there, but not, it's not a constraint on Jewish people. That has not prevented there from being a thriving Jewish culture in which Jews hang out with each other, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the same is true with, I hear people say that, but I must tell you that I still think many of the gay and lesbian people I know have more gay and lesbian friends than would be statistically the case if there was no predisposition, and there is still literature and things, and so no, I don't miss that at all. Look, there is this issue, and when you have oppression, segregation, it was true with African Americans and with gay people, there are some institutions that prosper because talented people who are black or gay or lesbian cannot get into the mainstream. And then when they get into the mainstream, that does deprive some of the segregated institutions of some people. But that's a price I'll gladly pay.
All right, who's got a question? There's a microphone coming to you.
Yes. Hi. Congressman, thank you for your remarks and for your public service. I'm struggling a little bit with your, what I would say is a little bit of a revision of history. And I'm also struggling a little bit with your political theory of change. So what I'm understanding, what I'm hearing is an emphasis and maybe even a sole focus on political power and building political power through an inside political process, a conventional political process. That seems, at best, exclusionary, at worst, discriminatory.
Exclusionary of whom?
Exclusionary of people who don't have the means or the skills or the knowledge or the time to be able to, or the money, frankly, to participate in that process. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about
Sure.
how we build a political process and build political power that's reflective of the full community.
I think you get it absolutely backwards.
Okay.
It takes much less time.
Help me.
It takes much less time, effort, and energy to communicate with your representatives than it does to go to a demonstration or a march. You can go see them in their district. So I reject the notion that it is harder to express your views to your representatives than it is to participate in marches, demonstrations, et cetera. And that's just factual. Secondly, you're wrong when you said, you're right, I want it to be political. Wrong when I said an inside process. I just said several times, the marches and demonstrations are good things if they help mobilize people to do things. I mean, Frank, I think you selectively heard what I said. I do, and I thought coming out was the prerequisite. That's hardly an inside strategy. But the fact is that decisions are made by the people who have power, and what you want is a strategy to influence them. But there's nothing exclusionary about that. In fact, and you said people don't have the means to do that. Yeah, if you're a citizen and you can vote, you have the means. And I think people, what I'm trying to say, read Mark Solomon's book, people underestimate the extent to which politicians are influenced by votes. And I also will tell you, a demonstration, people going out and marching, well, I'll make this distinction. During the AIDS crisis, those things helped pressure drug companies because private corporations are unused to being criticized. Politicians, if you're a politician and you get 65% of the vote regularly, you're in heaven, which means 35% of the people can hate you and you thrive. So what I'm saying is that the demonstrations aimed, solely demonstrations, marches, protests, aimed solely at politicians don't work. Those things which mobilize people then to lobby their legislators and vote for the right people and get involved, those do work. And again, the means for that is very simple. You have the right to vote. And I will reiterate, it is easier to send an email or even write a letter or be part of a group that goes and visits a state representative or senator. That takes much less time, energy, and even money than to come to Washington for a march. It's very expensive. People talk about, well, we're going to come to Washington and march. That's very expensive. You don't have to come to Washington. You can go see your representative at home.
All right, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Congressman. It's been terrific. Thanks, everybody.